Okay, I think we'll get going and just allow people to trickle in while I'm doing sort of the introductions and things like that. So a very good morning to you. My name's Helen Avery. I head up nature programs at the Green Finance Institute. As you know, we host not just the Secretariat for the TNFD, but also the UK National Consultation Group. And many of you have probably come to some of our webinars before. Today, we really wanted to offer you a chance to hear about how to get started. I know there has been a lot of materials out there and some global webinars from the TNFD, but we thought that would help if we sort of gave you a chance to sort of hear it through perhaps with your UK peers. So Thomas Viegas, who's head of capacity building and regulatory engagement at TNFD, is going to be walking us through that getting started. He's also going to share with us about early adoption. If you're thinking about being an early adopter, and you'll hear more about that later. And then we're very excited to be joined by Carolien Samson, who is head of sustainable banking, Oxbury Bank. They have completed their TCFD TNFD combined natural capital report and are an early adopter therefore of TNFD, and Carolien's going to be sharing some of the ethos of why they made that decision and then how internally they structured that, and some of the lessons learned from that report. So hopefully they'll be really helpful for you. I think we have an agenda just up on this screen if you're able to share it. So we, as I say, just to give you a bit of an update on the National Consultation Group for now. If you have joined, you should be getting a newsletter every now and again that will update you on events like these, and also broader publications and content coming out of the TNFD. I know some of you have opted not to receive that. I'm just letting you know, we really try not to bombard inboxes. It's really just so that you've got the information that you need. We are hiring somebody, we're just in that process at the moment, to run the UK National Consultation Group in the new year, which is really exciting. At the moment, we've sort of been doing it a bit side of desk, which is why it's been a bit ad hoc, and we've sort of gone sector by sector and been sort of fairly passive at running these webinars. But in the new year, hopefully in March, we'll start being much more active, coming out to you, speaking to you individually, traveling around the country, running workshops, and really helping get some of the content out of TNFD into your organisations to help you if you are getting started and progressing on that journey. So between now and then, though, what we'll probably do is sort of gauge from today where the interest lies from your questions and your comments in the chat, in terms of getting started in adoption, and we can run some other events in January and February, and we'll put more details up about that later. Just also a reminder for those of you who might not know that at GFI we have some work running at the moment on a risk quantification report. It's supported by Bank of England and working with their data with the Universities of Oxford and Reading and UNEP WCMC using the Encore tool, where we've been assessing the nature-related risk for the UK economy and what the materiality of that is. We'll be releasing some more information on that in January. I know some of you may have come to some of the roundtables around some of the scenario development and have fed into that. If you're interested in that, please do email me. My email's at the end, because we are looking for particularly financial institutions who could run some of those scenarios over the first quarter. But I will stop that there and pass over to Thomas, who's going to walk us through getting started. Thanks, Thomas. I'm not sure I can't hear you, Thomas. I don't know if it's just me.
Perfect. Sorry, can you hear me now? Apologies for that.
Yes, we can.
So,
perfect.
Dealing with multiple screens is one challenge in and of itself, but let's go to a more challenging topic, which is nature. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I'm a pleasure to be here. As Helen said, I'm really delighted to be able to talk about to you all as part of one of our largest consultation groups in terms of getting started. What I'm just going to very briefly outline, many of you will be familiar about what the TNFD in September has published, give you a little bit of a pre-release in terms of what's coming in the next few weeks as well, but then focus the bulk of what I'll discuss, as Helen mentioned, in terms of getting started and how you and your organization could go about doing that. The first, again, just before getting into getting started, let's start with what we're all talking about here, just for reference. So as many of us will be aware, in September, the TNFD, after 2 years of design and development, published its disclosure recommendations on nature-related issues. Underneath that, a suite of guidance, as shown here in this, what we like to term the pyramid of the TNFD. And just to give you a little bit of flavor, in the coming weeks, as COP28 comes into view, we will, as we've already highlighted in our newsletter, as many of you will get, or would have gotten, releasing further materials, further guidance, all with that intent to help organizations such as yourself get started. So we are producing or publishing more sector guidance, a couple of discussion papers, one on footprinting metrics and one on quantitative methods such as scenario analysis in terms of risk assessment. We're also publishing our landmark capacity building material, TNFD in a box, so very much like the TCFD, a set of modules that can help introduce you and colleagues in your organization to the TNFD. In particular, there's a board level summary as well, which we think can be particularly relevant, and also some new tools that we're helping to develop in case studies, all again with this underlying aim to support you and your organization get started. Now, again, something very much you'll be familiar with in terms of what the TNFD recommendations are and structured, but what I like to always say in this world of ever increasing acronyms is for the TNFD, you only need to remember your A, B, and C. So first, A is alignment. So the TNFD, in terms of covering risks, dependencies, and impacts, is aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was agreed just over a year ago, Target 15 specifically on disclosure. So the TNFD aligns exactly to that. B is for build. We have built on the TCFD, the Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, in terms of language, structure, and approach of the recommendations. And the C is for consistency. And so that's consistency with the ISSB's sustainability standards, particularly S1, and also the global reporting impact standards, GRI, in terms of the approach and architecture. So again, in a world of alphabet soup and acronyms, just remember your A, B, and C when it comes to TNFD. And here are the recommended disclosures, and this is ultimately what we will be asking yourselves, organizations, to get started with. Many of you will be familiar with the 4 pillars. Underneath the pillars, 14 recommended disclosures. Again, I won't really delve too much on this, as I know we'll have that's the bulk of the discussion, and looking forward to hearing your questions. Just want to underscore the colors. Green referring to what we built from the TCFD explicitly, 11 of the 14 here. All 11 TCFD recommendations have been adapted, built on for nature, and there are 3 additional ones which again we've provided and will continue to provide ample guidance and direction for organizations to be able to get started with them. So again, that's the package, how to get started with the package. Well, as many of you will be aware, one thing that we've done and we've learned from the experience of TCFD and others was to provide a simple one-stop shop for any organization, regardless of where they are in their journey with the TNFD, with nature, help get started with the recommendations. So we produced this guidance, which is less than 20 pages, with leading organizations globally, such as the World Economic Forum, WBCSD, the PRI, UNEP-FI, really with, again, that sole aim to make sure that there is not that fragmentation for yourselves, for your organization when getting started, that you can go to one piece of guidance where you know all organizations have fed in to give you that clear clarity in terms of direction. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about some of the key elements as part of that guidance, but again, I would really urge you to look at it because it does cover from very from the kind of high level some key steps which I'll walk you through, to the more granular about how to deal with data limitations, how to deal with value chains, how to deal with some of those real nuts and bolts issues which you'll all be getting to grips with, and as I'm sure Carolien will discuss how she got to grips with them and her team as well. So first, in terms of where to get started, this is often a question we're asked as part of the TNFD. And so in order to inform an understanding of where organizations, in terms of those recommendations, in terms of those pillars, in terms of those recommended disclosures. We asked the market, we asked organizations, some of you maybe would have responded to that. We published or set out a survey a couple of months ago prior to our launch, and we asked organizations a very simple set of questions ranging from, will you get started, and where in terms of the recommendations would you get started? What became incredibly clear, and one that wasn't surprising to us, is all organizations gave different answers and signaled that each would get different started in a different way. And again, that's a really critical point to underscore. We do not expect organizations all to work in lockstep in terms of how they get started, because every journey is going to be different. Just to highlight two main things from that survey, I'm starting with the right-hand side of this slide, there was significant variation among firms, among jurisdictions, among sectors, in terms of where they would feel that in terms of those 14 recommended disclosures and those 4 disclosure pillars, where they could get started. So the charts, or the two charts on the right-hand side, show that the respondents from corporates and financial institutions across those pillars. And what should be quite clear is you can see a higher degree of respondents thought they could get started initially with recommended disclosures, particularly in the governance and strategy pillars, and less so with the other 2 pillars. Now, in some sense, that's unsurprising. We know from the TCFD experience, that's where most organizations started. And so again, we very much expect from this survey, but also from our engagement, that's where organizations will tend to get started. Again, it's getting started with what they can get started with, not needing to get started with every single recommended disclosure all at once. And in terms of how many, we also thought this was quite an interesting statistic. The average respondent indicated that they could get started with 7 out of the 14 initially. Now, again, that's not what we are saying that you need to get started with. It was just an interesting statistic, because we know from the TCFD experience, many organizations started with a small number and built up over time. And so again, that's what we would expect. But we take the 7 out of 14 on average confirmation a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, about how we've built on the TCFD, means that for organizations who are already doing TCFD, they already have the architecture, the process, that capacity already to get started. And I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but also as Carolien and her experience at Oxbury would demonstrate, that is something we're already starting to see. Now, in terms of totality, the number who would get started, I'll take you to the left-hand side of the slide here. And again, the majority indicated by 2025 and 2026, they would be in a position, they thought, to get started with TNFD aligned reporting in their sustainability reports or associated reporting. And so again, very much we see this movement, we are hearing this movement both from the survey, but also from our engagements globally, of this willingness, this desire to get started with TNFD aligned reporting. So how to get started? Well, one thing we did with the organizations I mentioned is we developed a set of key steps, suggestive key steps, which we think all organizations could benefit from going through and through doing. Now, I'm going to produce them in a very nice circular motion, but as we know, when it comes to nature, things can be more complex, a bit ragged around the edges. And so we don't see these needing to be followed in a perfectly circular fashion, but rather just to give you a general sense from what we've heard from organizations, the lived experience, what we've heard from the pilot testers, how they've tended to work through internally their discussions, their work to be in a position to adopt. So first and fundamental is this need to deepen your understanding of the fundamentals of nature. So for many organizations, nature will be new. Nature will be coming into the organization's lexicon like climate only did less than a decade ago. And so what we've really heard from organizations is this ability to get board or get senior members of the organization, in addition to more of the analysts or sustainability teams, up to speed with some really core fundamentals is fundamental when getting started. So it's not to know everything about nature, it's not to become a scientist or ecologist, it's to know really those basic fundamentals of when we're talking about nature, when we're talking about how it relates to climate, what does that mean? And again, the TNFD provides resources that can facilitate that in your organization. The second, and as a result of that, understanding the fundamentals, is being able to make the business case for nature and get in that buy-in from your board and management. And here, this is really about making sure that you can provide that case for why your organization should conduct, identify, and assess nature-related issues relevant to your organization, and being able to unlock the resources, unlock that buy-in to be able to make that business case. And again, very much following from that first point about understanding the fundamentals, is about internally as your assessment teams or parts of your organization that will actually be doing the work on the ground, is being able to have that engagement and getting that senior buy-in from your organization. Now, another key thing in terms of getting started, which again, Carolien will give you a lived experience by, and one thing we heard again across the board, was start with what you have and leverage your work. So particularly, as I've mentioned, in terms of the TNFD's ABCs, it's that B and C, it's building on the TCFD, and it's that consistency with the ISSB and other standards that are coming in terms of sustainability space, is use what you're doing. Look at what you're doing in your organization, particularly if your organization has done TCFD reporting for some years. Again, you will have the architecture, you will have the process, you will have the resource to be able to take on TNFD reporting in tandem. And again, I don't want to front run Carolien, you will be able to see those synergies and those overlaps in terms of the climate and nature space. Related to starting with what you have is obviously planning for progression and communicating your plans. And by this, to be clear, it's not about making more or additional public commitments. By communication, that is communicating internally, so your organization has this joined up approach. There will obviously be different areas of your organization you'll need to draw on, maybe for technical expertise, maybe for data needs, but making sure internally there is that clear and concise and coherent communication on that direction of travel. But also internally, in addition to internally rather, also externally, but particularly in terms of your supply chain. So both downstream and upstream suppliers that you may have, whether you're a financial institution, obviously your investees, making sure that you're having that dialogue in terms of where you plan to go in terms of the TNFD aligned report. Again, all with the aim here to be able to build expertise along your value chains and also help enhance and support data collection. Again, something that we saw very acutely throughout the piloting phase of the beta version of the recommendations and guidance. Now, finally, in terms of 5 and 6, again, this very much leads on from that last point or key step I mentioned about having that communication, is encouraging collective progress. And here I think the consultation group is an excellent example of this. You're all organizations committed to wanting to understand and have that ambition in terms of nature-related reporting and understanding nature-related issues. And really, it's about making sure that, again, within your organization, within your sector, within your jurisdiction, is being able to foster that collective progress through conversations, through collaboration. And again, the consultation group here provides that excellent platform for yourselves to do so. 6 will be monitoring and evaluating your own adoption process. So obviously, as you plan to progress, as you get started and you increase your ambition over time, it's important, again, with anything in terms of your organization, in any business, is to monitor and evaluate. How are you progressing? What challenges and barriers are you facing? Are there some low-hanging fruit that you've now identified? Making sure that you have built in from the start that mechanism to monitor and evaluate your progress, again, will help support with that engagement with your peers, with engagement with other sectors, and really, again, be able to foster that collective movement towards increased ambition. Some specific examples we heard from pilot testers and through firms now that are going through this is the creation of dashboards, for example, for senior management, so that they can understand some of those key barriers or pressure points that an organization from the analytical side are facing. And again, being able to report back on the state of their identification and assessment, or their LEAP assessment that the TNFD has provided, again, just can provide a really important bit of information internally to understand how you may need to change course or tweak, or maybe unlock some resource for a particular element. So collectively, I've kind of given a whistle-stop tour, but those are the broad brush, the 6 key steps that, again, collectively the TNFD Secretariat with other organizations have identified through engagement with the market, through the piloting, but as they now go through the process of adopting the TNFD, seven key steps, seven stones, as it were, which you may want to use on your journey when getting started. Now, all of this and more can be found again in that Getting Started with the Adoption of the TNFD Recommendations guide, all available on our website, and there's links at the end. Again, it's a very short, concise guide which draws from the rest of the guidance we've published. Now, just before stopping and handing over back to Helen, I also just want to illustrate another document that was released in September, which also you might find useful when getting started. And particularly, this is an illustrative example of an integrated TCFD and TNFD report produced by Foraco, an Australian company, which really underscored both kind of across the pillars, across the recommended disclosures, what a TNFD and TCFD aligned report, or integrated rather report, would look like in practice. So again, it's an illustrative report, and we think it's a useful one, particularly for organizations, as again, many in this space have asked us for, is what does it look like visually? So on paper, what would an integrated report look like? And we expect, and as Carolien will come on to, we should see more of this going forward, and we're really encouraged again by the speed in which we're starting to see this on integrated reporting. Again, really really consistent with kind of what I've said in terms of the getting started and those key steps too. So with that, I'll stop there and hand back to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I wonder if you, while Carolien is speaking, you're able to find that link to this Foraco report. That would be great to share with the room. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to find it. And actually, that reminds me, Carolien, I should probably share yours as well, so people can see one from what you're about to walk us through. We've got one question, so I think we'll take that and then come to Carolien, and then I think we'll probably have a lot more questions about that getting started and early adoption, and then we'll hear more about the early adoption process. And it's from Etche, and she just asked, are there any public sector enterprises in this sample? And this is when you were sharing the bar charts of where people have started, and from corporates and financial sector, or generally, are there any coming forward for piloting?
Yeah, it's a great question. So on the first part, no, those were all market, private sector companies, both from an FI and a company perspective. In terms of piloting, obviously, now that we've published the recommendations, piloting is a thing of the past. We obviously understand that there'll be training programs to help organizations start to report and disclose. But piloting was done on something that was draft. We are now published. But as part of that piloting process, as you may be aware, we had 240 plus organizations who were piloting. Some of them were public sector, a minority, but some of them were. And again, we continue to have discussions with them in terms of how they may use aspects of the TNFD, the recommendations, and all the guidance going forward. But again, from speaking to some of these organizations and speaking to, again, the market, what we've really found already is some of the big value add from, again, organizations that not necessarily are market participants, looking at the TNFD, looking at the recommendations and guidance, is to speak that common language. So when I talk about communication and collaboration, it's really making sure that these institutions or organization, whether it be in the public or private sphere, are talking the same language when we're discussing the fundamentals of nature, about how to have corporate reporting in the nature space. It's really being able to foster that consistent and coherent conversation among different segments of the market.
Thanks, Thomas. And Etche, I do know of several public sector organisations in the UK who are thinking about it. I don't know if they've made their business case internally yet, so I won't share who those are, because I'm not sure where they are on their journey. But there are some certainly considering it, and maybe we can pick up afterwards on those if I can check whether those is for public attribution or not. So with that, love to, as I say, introduce Carolien. If you missed my introduction at the beginning, Carolien's Head of Sustainable Banking at Oxbury Bank, who's going to walk us through their thinking and how they did and some of the challenges they learned from their TCFD, TNFD Integrated Natural Capital Report. So over to you, Carolien.
Morning, everybody. Let's just see if all the tech works. Should work.
Perfect.
Okay, so Oxbury Bank is a bank created in 2018. We started operating in 2021, and we are based in Chester in the northwest of England. But we finance the agricultural sector and only the agricultural sector. So if you're a single sector bank focused on a sector that is exposed both to climate and nature risk, then being able to think through and integrate your reporting becomes quite a priority for both ourselves and our regulators and our shareholders. So that was one of the reasons why we decided to do a combined report. Just for background, we were the 30th new bank in the UK, the first pure agricultural focused bank in the last century. Currently about 170 staff. We have 20 odd relationship managers based across the country and the rest of us up in Chester. We've lent out of 750 million to the sector so far, raising $1 billion in deposits for the sector. And we're quite proud of the fact that the 21 months to get to profitability was the fastest of any of the challenger banks to date. So we are quite happy with that. I do say to people that we are a bank, and all kinds of altruism aside, we do want our loans to be repaid. And currently our average term loan is well over 20 years. So for us, the kind of risks that's coming from nature is very fundamental to how we think and how we look at risk management. So from our perspective, if we think about that, our thoughts behind it is the need to finance a just transition in the agricultural sector in the UK. And that for us consists of three considerations at this point. Looking at farmer emissions, on-farm emissions, and how to reduce those and assist farmers to find plans to reduce. Improvement in soil health, which will then be both an indicator of future water resilience, as well as soil carbon that gets sequestrated, and then looking at increasing the biodiversity in the farming environment. Pollinators being obviously a key element in our future. Like I said, we're not doing this because we have any altruistic motives. Reporting perspective, we are, as a regulated bank, already expected to report in terms of TCFD. We released our first TCFD report in 2021, and we relied heavily on the learnings out of that report to inform our combined report. For us, a lot of this is about risk management. As an agricultural focused bank, we need to make sure that our customers can in future still be with us if we're going to be lending to them for 20 years. And so a lot of how we think about natural capital is based on that risk mitigation perspective. And then we also believe that as funding farmers for a transition will increase both the farming community's resilience, but also our resilience as an institution. In terms of our natural capital report, like I said, we released a TCFD report in 2021, and that was the basis for what we did. Some of the pre-work that was particularly helpful is we had a climate change policy, which is very much a climate-focused policy. We updated that to incorporate a wider term approach to natural capital. So including the atmosphere, biodiversity, soil, and water. And knowing that all these dimensions are interdependent, and therefore we are hoping to focus our future reporting across all four dimensions. We also did a very extensive subsector risk analysis. So we divided the agricultural sector into subsectors based on our loan book from a materiality perspective. We then looked at risks. So again, across those 4 pillars, risks to each of those subsectors, what possible mitigants there are. And all of that work then flowed into our eventual report. The report itself was signed off in July by our board. We released it in September. There's a link to it. I'll put a link in the chat as well. From a methodology perspective, being at the time when we did it, a lot of this had to be kind of done by us thinking through stuff and hoping for the best. We used our carbon footprint to inform how we thought about our own operations. Obviously, as what was then just over 100 people footprint in one office in Chester, it's not, and I keep saying that writing about our own location in Chester is particularly boring. But we use that for looking at our own impact. We applied the LEAP methodology, and we applied it across climate and nature. We found it was a really useful methodology to not only look at nature risk, but also to consider our climate risk. So one of the things when we wrote the report and combined the methodology was just try and make sure under each element that we work across the 4 pillars and not just focus on one element. At the time, when we did the report, I relied heavily on the science-based targets for nature guidance. At that point, that was the most comprehensive that we had. And a lot of what I did was literally just working through their guidance and going, okay, so if I have to do this, what does this look like in our report? Also incredibly valuable for us at that point was a TNFD webinar. So like these, I'm a big enthusiastic proponent of kleptomania when it comes to reporting and finding examples from how other people are doing it and applying those is one of the reasons why we've also put our report is to say, well, there has to be some examples of what you can do. Some of the challenges that we faced, the data for biodiversity reporting is, it's kind of, I keep saying it's the opposite of the climate data. On the climate side, we know the science, it's old science, the methodologies are established, we're all just searching for the data. On the biodiversity side, there is tons of data available, but very little like clear methodologies. So agreeing the scope of what all that data should be, and learning how to apply it to our own business is one of the challenges that we have. Our other challenge overall is when we start looking at indicators, is the expectation that farmers will have data available on farm, which in many cases is either not there or the farmer is not an administrator per se. They're not there to do our reporting for us. So there is a specific challenge about how we're going to collect some of that data and how much of it we can collect either within supply chains and share within supply chains, or what is possible without the farmer necessarily having to change their day and plans to do our admin. From a resources perspective, at the point when we wrote this, it was myself and Tim Coates, our Chief Regulatory Officer, was the main resources. I relied heavily on, fortunately, EXCO was very happy to, so Chief Finance Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Executive Officer, all gave significant input, and the board very diligently read the report as well. But it was an effort with very limited people, and so we had to make some of this. We probably cut down some of the scope in the process to meet our resources. The report, we know the report as it is incomplete. There are gaps, scenario planning being a major one. But we also feel that it is important to put something out there to give information and then to be able to get feedback and to show that progression that Thomas also spoke about over time. From a policy environment perspective, there's also still movements in disclosures, movements in, so TPT coming along. So it does feel like there's this constant need to keep up and to keep trying to combine reporting. But I mean, I think the one message from our side is if we are able to do this with very limited resources, and as a small bank, part of this is just sit down and start writing and just work your way through the materials. I'm very happy that the new TNFD guidance is now available. I can see that we'll rely heavily on that for this next year's report. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carolien. That's really helpful. Just got the sun in my eyes. There's just a quick question here. Or I wasn't saying quick, it might not be. And it was actually about that data. You meant, is the submission of the data a term of the loan agreement that the borrower has to satisfy? I suppose this could be where we end up going. I don't know.
It could very well be. At this point, it's not. But we might be looking at loans where we will be requiring some data. We're also looking at how we work with farmers to enable them to construct transition plans. So we've, for the past year, encouraged farmers and provided them with access to carbon footprinting material. We're looking at soil carbon measurement on behalf of farmers, and then biodiversity will be its own interesting version. But at this stage, we're not expecting it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that answer. Just passing it on. I don't see any more, but I guess there's a couple of things I thought we could sort of talk to that might be interesting. We hear, and Thomas mentioned it, about the importance of the business case. And what we hear from companies is that we really want to do it, but I just can't make the business case to X. I can't make it. And obviously, you share, Carolien, that you already bought in for all the reasons that you laid out, and that when you were going through business case, you were thinking about reporting, risk management, and resilience. So it's a question to you and Thomas, I suppose. If companies, if representatives from companies here are having trouble making that business case, what have you seen, and what would your advice be on how to do that? It's something that when we our NCG head of NCG comes in next year, that we'll be working through with companies to help them. But just any thoughts on that point?
I think, Helen, a lot, like I said, there's a lot of data around nature, and what in many cases, I think it is just to understand the full supply chain. Because companies, I think in general, sometimes underestimate where their reliance is. And once you can start pinpointing specific areas in the supply chain, it becomes, I think, more feasible to do a business case.
Thank you. That's helpful. Rich has put in the post, Microsoft's has a LinkedIn post on why they how they made the business case for carbon and nature reporting. And Thomas, anything for you on that business case point before we take this question from Eche?
Yeah, I mean, I think just building on Carolien, I mean, again, this is kind of from a broad step back perspective on what we're hearing. I mean, it's really that business case is being driven by, you know, in terms of the internal capability. I think Carolien's mentioned it, but really it's understanding. I mean, it's really understanding at a very basic level kind of how your organization is exposed to some of these nature related issues. In some sense, it's, you know, needing to do very minimal kind of due diligence to make sure kind of, you know, is an organization for its direct operations or value chains exposed. And again, from a lot of the piloting, even that initial work, again, highlighted there are these potential exposures or blind spots, and that helped generate that internal business case to actually act and do more work. I think, as you know, as Rich has put in there, again, something we've heard about is looking across your sector, looking across your jurisdiction, you know, again, which is pretty unfamiliar in the corporate space, looking at if there are leaders, that obviously then, you know, from a kind of reputational point of view, applies that need and kind of, you know, spurs momentum. And I'd probably say third and finally is, you know, obviously we can't escape it, the regulatory landscape and movements there, and particularly, you know, kind of from what we've seen, particularly from, you know, central banks and supervisors, the Network for Greening the Financial System that those on the call may be aware of, a group of over 125 plus globally. They've come out with work over the past few years, which has been, you know, completely underscores the point, or has been very explicit, that nature-related risk in particular, they see as part of their core mandates to deliver the actions to support monetary and financial stability. So again, it's in that backdrop that's a particularly an FI example, but seeing also, you know, understanding the environment in which organizations will need to be operating in the coming years. Again, all with this push about getting ahead of the curve. And that's not even to mention the broader agenda on climate and where nature's fitting in, which obviously many firms already have made the business case and needing to already address, which also nature has become increasingly a part of that. For example, we've seen, just to give one example, with the transition plan work in the UK and the TPT, the Transition Plan Taskforce, nature has been part of that, will increasingly be part of that discussion as well going forward. So in some sense, also the climate agenda is creating and supporting that business case among firms to do their due diligence in terms of nature.
And we're hopeful that the UK risk quantification report that will be out like March, April, but we'll be releasing some parts of it in January, might also just sort of share what the business case is, because we've looked at sector by sector across the UK, in addition to the finance sector and the exposure and materiality. And those are also climate nature combined scenarios that have been run, just to reflect this compounding risk of the two running together. So as I mentioned before, you can email me if you're interested in that work, and we'll add you to the distribution list. So there's a question here, and then I think we'll take a poll and come on to early adoption. And it's from Eche. Were there any risks associated with adopting TNFD that you had to consider, Carolien?
Yes, but I think the one benefit of early adopting is that nobody can really point a finger to you and say, well, you're doing this wrong, especially if you release before the final guidance is out. So that took, I think, quite a bit of the risk out of the picture for us, the fact that we knew that it is still in development. The other part of it is just, and we try to be very clear in our disclosure what we didn't know. So just being very, very clear about, we can answer this part, but we can't answer this part. So I think those two combined reduce the risk quite a bit for us.
Thank you. And then I just have a question. I wonder if you've considered, you know, obviously the information that you'll be getting to help you with your reporting is information that many others through their supply chains will also be needing to get. Have you sort of thought about working with others to sort of share that data to speed things up? Just wondered if anyone, and if you have in the chat, I'd love to hear as well.
I mean, so we're definitely trying to explore joint pilot projects to see where we can share data. It's in all our interest in the food and ag sector not to ask farmers for the same thing 3 times. And the other part of it is to try and share costs, because it is going to be costly to collect some of this data.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So we have a quick poll for you, and that's what we're trying to gauge how many are interested in becoming an early adopter. And as you've seen from Carolien, that can be just, you know, your first go at a combined report or an individual TNFD report. So it's very simple. Yes, no, maybe is what we're asking for you to vote, just so we can understand more about the appetite for that. And it will also help us gauge future events that we might want to host, specifically by sector or even by region. So while you're answering that, I'm just going to invite Thomas to come back and share about the early adoption process. And then we'll have a last round of questions, I think, if there are any, and then wrap up. Thanks. Over to you, Thomas.
Great, thanks, Helen. And as people are voting, I'm hoping in some sense to sway your vote, but I don't want to contaminate the sample. So yeah, I'm sure you've already decided before voting, but let me just give a little bit more overview of now. Again, as I've titled this, from ambition, again, everyone here as part of the consultation group, you will have that underlying ambition to advance in this, and so how you can move from that ambition to adoption. So before getting into a little bit in the details, again, I kind of want to just set the scene with how the TNFD, the architecture it's built, can support your organization get and move from that adoption journey from ambition to actually that tangible reporting. As many of you will be aware, we have the TNFD Forum, now over 1,300 plus organizations, all that can keep abreast of what we're doing, what at a global level, the capacity building we're providing at a global level, and those consultation groups such as this, again, are plugged into the forum, but are plugged in also, as I mentioned, to that UK hub, being able to understand industry and momentum across your peer group. Something that we're also establishing is something called the Community of Practice, which we announced in September, offerings of which will be formalized next year. And this will be an area we expect a subset of forum members to deepen their capabilities, to be able to support them actually, again, have that report, create that TNFD reporting, be able to actually help them identify and assess their nature-related issues. The community of practice will be the sole focus of the community of practice, and it will have partner organizations also providing capacity building and training to help organizations. And then again, we will have the adopters, so those that come out through that journey that are producing TNFD aligned reporting, and are very much in terms of the end of that adoption journey in terms of reporting. And again, we see consultation groups such as this, such as the 10 others or 10 or 11 others that we have, being able to provide that platform from that national jurisdictional level to provide organizations and support them on that pathway from ambition to adoption. Now, again, just given who we are, given where we sit, I thought I just really want to underscore again where really we think that the case for UK leadership in this space is quite striking. As many of you will be aware, the UK has long been a global leader in terms of green finance, and that kind of goes with climate and beyond, and for many years has been a proponent both domestically but at that global level. And so really voluntary TNFD adoption again provides that additional avenue, that additional spoke to that wheel of global leadership from UK firms. Also, the Quinn Montreal and the UK financing gap, which GFI, which Helen and colleagues have underscored, that size just really represents a significant opportunity, particularly for UK investors, from what we've been hearing as well, that ability to really finance, engage with organizations that will be able to survive and thrive in that transition to a global biodiversity framework, to a Paris-aligned transition, is very much one where, again, their investment opportunities are becoming more ample, and the TNFD recommendations and guidance allows organizations to be able to identify, assess, and engage with those organizations too. Now, we've already touched on it a little bit through what Helen said, but also for a UK firm, for a company, an FI, TNFD adoption, again, through its identification, its assessment, its management, its disclosure, can help your organization understand your potential exposure to your nature-related issues. I think it's very timely. Only a couple of days ago, we had the Office for National Statistics in the UK publish its natural capital accounts, and it underscored that about, we have 1.5 trillion pounds worth of natural capital in the UK. Again, every organization will be engaging, depending and impacting on that. And so really the TNFD can help your organization understand your dependency, your impact, your risk, and your opportunity too. Also, operating outside of the EU now, I think it would be, I would still need to say that obviously given the UK is not immune to what is going on across the world, UK businesses that operate abroad also aren't immune. Particularly one very close to home we've seen in the European Union, the formalization of the CSRD requirements that will come into place next year for companies that operate within the EU. And again, they've highlighted the usefulness of the TNFD, particularly the LEAP approach, to be able to help organizations, businesses, and financial institutions comply with that regulation too. Fourth, and again, just really summing up, TNFD adoption really does provide that platform for UK business and financial institutions to reposition themselves, to remodel themselves, to support nature positive opportunities and outcomes. And I've given some here on the slide where UK organizations already are really demonstrating that leadership on the global stage. And again, TNFD adoption, again, provides or enhances that platform for organizations based here.
Thomas, just to interrupt, we're not seeing slides. So I know we're going to share them after, but you might want to just share that last one you were mentioning.
Sorry, I'm sorry about that. I thought these were being
No, that's okay. I thought maybe you were having tech issues and decided to go without them, but when you mentioned
no, apologies. So you can see these?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so again, very just briefly to sum up, this is the adoption journey I was talking about, forum, community of practice and adopters, and how the consultation group can support. And then here is, again, that slide on that case for market leadership as well, which will all be circulated afterwards. So very much, and I look forward to hearing the poll results, being able to register your intent and really, again, turn that adoption ambition into adoption action. What the TNFD has and continues to call for in the run-up to January is calling on organisations to register their intent with the TNFD Secretariat. So this is confidentially your organisation bilaterally registering your intent with us about your intention to report in a TNFD aligned way. Get started with that reporting as part of your financial year 2024 or 2025 outcomes. Now, to be clear, I've put some examples of organizations, and obviously Carolien is one that is a public adopter, and we are not stating that you need to publicly say anything. We obviously understand, as I said, for every organization, it's your journey, whether you want to privately register your intent and work with us to be able to support you on this journey, or whether you feel like you'd like to publicly state already your intention, that is up to you. But again, what we're already seeing is a high degree of combination of both. What do you get if you register to be a TNFD adopter, you may ask? Well, what we plan to do at the World Economic Forum in the new year at Davos, we will be unveiling the list of TNFD adopters. So this list, this early cohort of market leaders, being able to showcase both across sector, across jurisdictions, really the pioneers in this space. And so again, registering your intent to report whether in financial year 2024 and 2025 outcomes, and will give you and that organization a platform at the global stage. So I think there's some resources. I know they've already been shared, but I'm happy to take any more questions on that, and also very excited to find out those poll results. So back to you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Yes, Phoebe, are you able to share our results? We've got 8 yes are considering being an early adopter, no, and 11 maybes, so all to be turned. And for those 11 maybes, if there's anything you need from ourselves or the TNFD team that can help you think through whether it's right for you, and you have got a couple of years to adopt it. I think that's what people forget. You're not asking you to do your report in January. Do let us know. And we'll put the emails up in just a moment. Just one question here from Etche again. Is Davos in January the only time you'll announce early adopters, or will this be a regular practice? Oh yeah, that's a great question.
It's a great question. Obviously, by the kind of name, the early adopters are only the first set. So we will only be announcing this once. After that, obviously, when a organization publicly wants to make a commitment, we would be highly encouraging and we would be supportive of that. But we plan on our website to update the list of TNFD aligned reporters. Again, for means of transparency, we will be showcasing to other sectors, other companies across jurisdictions, what is going on in this space. But again, Davos is the big moment to be part of that earlier cohort, again, to be part of that pioneering group of TNFD early adopters.
And I think we do have already, I don't know if they're made public, so I won't mention it, a few from the UK who've signed up. Obviously, you mentioned United Utilities, saw their logo in the slide you just shared, and obviously we have Oxbury Bank, and I think a couple more of the water companies are also en route to that. Is there anyone else who's publicly been announced in the UK, just so we can create some competitive tension?
No, well, I think you've kind of covered them. Obviously, I think, sorry, I think you just kind of slowly, but GSK also is announced. GSK was one of the first. But again, like, just to underscore your point, Helen, we are seeing, you know, the UK is already showing leadership kind of across. And so I think you, for any organization listening, you'll be at a very good and growing group of, you know, real UK leadership in this.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's a question in chat. It's slightly different topic. So if no one wants to answer it here, we can just hold it, Valerie, and come back to you separately. But it's really about, you know, are you seeing an equal effort by organisations adopting TNFD and investing to offset or mitigate impacts, either by purchasing nature market credits, outcome buying, or philanthropic contributions? So early, I would think, but any immediate reflections on that? Otherwise, we'll take it away, Valerie, and obviously Richard's put in an option for companies as well. Any comments you're seeing, Thomas or Carolien?
We're not seeing any at this point. And from our perspective, our focus is now to finance customers who are getting involved in nature projects. So farmers establishing forests, woodland, and similar, rather than offsetting.
Yeah, thank you. Thomas, anyone that you've come across on this adoption journey also looking at mitigation offsets?
I mean, I think, you know, obviously there's a range of things that are being looked at. I mean, particularly nature and biodiversity credits, I know, obviously, and I think there's quite a growing body of work being done, particularly by Nature Finance, on nature markets as well. I think, you know, that's very much in terms of the outcome spectrum, in terms of some of those marginal tools. Again, very much what we're seeing through organizations that are piloted using the LEAP assessment is really through bringing nature into the core elements of decision making. It's about also figuring out some of those kind of real fundamental shifts in terms of, you know, direct operations or stuff across the value chain. That's where we're seeing really the value add of the TNFD recommendations and guidance through the piloting, and what we would hope to see again going forward.
Just a UK specific answer, really, Valerie. So we are, this is GFI, we do a lot of work on nature markets in the UK, and we support, there's over 150 projects going through the National Environment Investment Readiness Fund and Fern's Investment Readiness Fund up in Scotland. And we are starting to talk to companies about making that link, even philanthropically, to support some of those projects, to understand whether they could potentially be a source of credits for offsets down the line. Very, very early days, and mainly all philanthropic. There are some business cases and commercial opportunities available within projects in the UK, but that's sort of what we're recommending at the moment, sort of dip a toe in, start to understand how these markets are going to develop from a strategic perspective of where you are regionally and what your biodiversity sticking points are, whether it's water quality or it might be flood as well. So, but feel free to drop us an email. We're going to put up a slide now that just got everyone's email addresses. So you have that. You can take a screenshot if you're on the way out the door of this meeting, but we will share these slides with you. So just a huge thanks to Thomas and Carolien for coming and sharing with us today. Hopefully you have all the resources you need from this. To say, we will be sharing slides. If you have any other questions, particularly around early adoption, please do email thomas.viegas@tnfd.global. All other questions you might have around the National Consultation Group, feel free to email me directly. I mentioned the risk quantification report, feel free to email me as well, or we have a general TNFD NCG UK inbox, tnfd.ncg@gfi.green. But thank you so much. On the hour, we're off, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.